Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. All right, we can proceed to the next one. Right. So one of the first things that I like to say is that the ACT government has been working on climate change issues for at least 20 years. I joined the ACT government a bit less than 4 years ago, and one of the reasons why I moved jobs is because the ACT is the leading jurisdiction in Australia, and certainly globally it is in the top leading cities acting on climate change. And you can see that because we have a specific Climate Change and Greenhouse Gas Mitigation Act 2010 that sets a number of targets. If you could, let's just go quickly. So, so far the focus has been on mitigation, which is reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, and as you know, we have a target of reducing them by 40% from 1990 levels by 2020, and we're well on track to achieve that. You will have heard that the way that we are focusing on achieving those through renewable energy. We've just announced, or the government's just announced, that by 2020 we will have 100% renewable energy powering Canberra.
Electricity.
Sorry? Electricity, correct. What did I say?
Energies.
Energy, sorry. Yeah, there is a big difference, sorry. Okay. So, because we focus on that, and there is a raising of, growing awareness that the other side of the equation, which is actually dealing with the locked-in climate change that we're going to have to deal with, it hasn't been the focus of much attention. We've gone through all of the government directorates and we've looked at what they're doing, and we can say that yes, we might not be doing it 150%, we might not be well practiced, but the reality is that for a city our size, we're managing well our resources. So many people think that if we continue to do that, we will be okay. The reality is that we're moving into an environment that none of us have experienced. That just explains about our targets and how we're moving just slowly from mitigation into adaptation. Okay, so what is the reality that we face? Why do we need to adapt? Because the temperatures will continue to rise into the future, and what we're expecting here for the ACT is, of course, warmer environments, but also a more variable rainfall. It's going to come down in a lot stronger storm events, and that will test the delivery of our essential services into the city. This is a very sobering diagram where I try to demonstrate, and this is not from me, this is the IPCC, we try to demonstrate that even if we stopped all emissions globally right now, the system will continue to warm for centuries. Okay? Just like we turn on the toaster in the morning, it doesn't heat up immediately, or the kettle, it's the same effect. We have enough greenhouse gases accumulated in the atmosphere that we will continue to go through a warming event, and that's why people talk about trying to keep that warming event or a warming outcome to about 2 degrees, which is what they call the go row. They call it the go row because if we go beyond 2 degrees, then we don't have an ability to predict that's what's going to happen, and we might be looking at catastrophic climate change. So, this is a summary. There's the ACT government worked with New South Wales and with CSIRO, and we did an exercise called downscaling. When we talk about climate change projections, we usually talk about global scale models. Those models use grids of 100 by 100 kilometers. A lot of people think that there are impacts that are going to happen in some other part of the world, but not us. What we've done is, working with New South Wales, we've come up with projections of how climate change is going to impact the city. The story is not too dissimilar to what's going to happen to the rest of the world, or certainly to New South Wales, but it just gives us the opportunity to actually discuss these changes to everybody. This is what's happening in my city, and therefore this is what I need to do, that we all need to do to actually prepare for those changes. I'd like to just mention that when you hear about these projected changes, people talk about average, and that's because the science is not completely 150%. It is an evolving field. So there's a range in the projections. And people tend to talk about the average. But the reality is that nature doesn't work like that. If you see a graph of the temperatures, it's not a temperature going up like that, it actually goes up like that. And it's these extremes that actually come and test us. So if the projected average is that we're going to have an additional couple of days over 35 degrees, say by 2025 or whatever it might be, the reality is that we're going to have at least, nature might say, well, you're going to have a bit of a drought first, and then you're going to have not just those 2 days, but you're going to have an additional 10, 15 days over 35. It's very difficult for people to rest at night if the temperature goes above 35, because it doesn't cool down enough for us to sleep comfortably, and therefore we need to turn on our air conditioning. And if we don't have the means to have an air conditioning or the ability to pay these power bills, then it starts to become a problem, especially in a population that is going to be on a percentage basis getting a lot older and obviously larger. So there's going to be a lot more people that might require some assistance from our medical services. So what I'm painting here is a worst case scenario, if you like, but it's our responsibility to respond to those worst case scenarios and prepare Canberra to be able to deliver on these essential services into the future. Next one. So what's all this adaptation strategy? The strategy goes out, identifies what the impacts are going to be. We look at the different sectors that operate in our community, and then we test them. We try and identify which ones are the most susceptible to these impacts. It might be the older demographic, it might be those people that are not as affluent as us, it might be the young people, it might be workers outside that have to deal with 35-degree days. It might be transport, for example, in Melbourne, after 46-degree days, the tram lines buckled, etc. So we went and looked at all of those things, and we came up with a series of recommendations as to what we're going to do. I can't give you any more details. Some people will have heard me say this already, and the reason is because it's before government and it's considering, and I hope that at some point they'll make a decision and come and tell me, and I'll be very, very pleased. But in preparing this advice, we looked at how do we reduce our vulnerability, how we increase our resistance or resilience to these impacts. And we did it so looking at things that if we actually did them and the temperature didn't fluctuate so much or didn't go up as much, we still wouldn't regret it. Things, for example, like if we recommend or improve the standards on insulation, at the end of the day it'll save us money and it'll make us more comfortable, whatever the temperature regime might be. So we're looking at those sorts of things. We want to give our future generations the same opportunities that we've enjoyed. We've looked at, if we're designing a bit of infrastructure, a bridge, a road, a hospital, whatever it might be, that we look at its whole of life, so that things that we design today, which are fit for purpose for the environment that we live in today, are also fit for purpose 50 years down the track. Okay? And the last one is shared responsibility. Government can't do everything. It's up to the community, to individuals, and to business to all chip in together. Next one, please. These are the sectors that we focused on: community and health and well-being, disaster and emergency management, settlements, infrastructure, water, and natural resources. This is just a matrix indicating that all government departments have different acts, and we're all doing, to more or less a degree, things that could be considered adaptation. Adaptation might be a technical term, but we all do it. We all have to learn from or we look at things that are coming our way and prepare a response for them. Business does it every day. That's just demonstrating what I explained as to how the temperature might, continue to go above 2 degrees and what we need to be prepared to do. By the way, this presentation will be available on your website.
Okay.
Yeah. No problem there. And if you have any questions, if you go and look at the slides at some point and say, well, I didn't quite understand that, please don't hesitate to contact me. This is another snapshot. I don't know if you've seen this. This is what's called the bushfire-prone areas in the ACT. No surprises there. If we have a drought, we are surrounded by material that's going to be highly combustible, and therefore we need to look at how we prevent these catastrophes from happening? How can we reduce the impacts of them? And we do that by better design, better coordination with emergency services, better education, etc. Okay, so the strategies I mentioned has a series of actions. You just keep going. Yep. And these actions, they're more than 26, I can tell you that much. But we have 4 outcomes. And the first one is to make sure that the whole of the city is better. That we increase the resilience, not just of one particular suburb or sector, but the whole city, our whole community. Next one. That the city that we enjoy now, because it's the bush capital, because it's got a lot of green open spaces compared to others, that we maintain that amenity into the future. We don't want to, see a future where we just spend our times inside shopping centres because they're cool. We want to create nice shady pathways for people to do exercise and to be outside and enjoy the city. In working in renewable electricity, there was a lot of comments that we couldn't afford to do this, that it was going to be too difficult to do, that it was not going to be a good result for Canberra. Well, again, I'm very pleased to report that it's been a very good result for Canberra, that we're getting the cheapest possible prices in Australia for renewable electricity. And in doing so, we're capturing new industries here in the capital. We have head offices of a number of these renewable electricity companies setting up here, and they're their Asia Pacific offices. They're investing in research, they're investing in training. So we're investing in the knowledge economy, which is a very important sector. I wish we could have more of the knowledge economy power in Canberra than, for example, real estate. I mean, I'm not saying anything against real estate, but we need to diversify a little bit of how we actually conduct business in the city. That's my perspective. So if we can do adaptation and at the same time identify these opportunities to become experts or to export our expertise or develop new materials, why not do it? Why not capture it and take advantage of it? And finally, integration. If we continue to do the same thing that we've always done, well, we'll get to the same place, right? So we are looking at how we can do things a bit more effectively within government in a better coordinated way so that health is not doing something that's contrary to what APD might want to do or suggest to do. Hard task. This is just a photograph that sort of like spurs us into action. You can see it's just an infrared photograph. You can see that underneath a tree in the shade, it's at least 12 degrees cooler. So for us, one of the obvious things that we need to do is to invest in what we call living infrastructure, which is the trees, the bushes, the parks, the green open spaces, the waterways. Because the more we have of those, and the better care they are for, the cooler city we're going to have. Okay, this is just an observation that change is coming, and if we prepare for it, we'll be in a better place to take advantage of the opportunities, not just actually suffer because of the change. Just keep this one. Okay, this is, I don't know how many of you have seen this, but again, this is another thing that actually motivates me to work. This is the degree of change in trees that we have into the future if we did nothing. So you can see by 2030, all of these purple areas indicate that there's going to be some degree of change in what you see as the natural collection of trees that makes the forest. So that's what it's going to be by 2070 if we do nothing. So change is coming, and we need to prepare for that change. Okay. This is our beautiful city. As you can see, it's that Black Mountain up there, and there's lots of people outdoors. Next one. And unfortunately, climate change is going to give us these effects, extreme weather events, warmer climate, irregular rainfall, and of course, from time to time, bushfires. But that's not the only series of problems that a city has. You have lots of, you speak to any mayor of any city and they'll tell you, that's just one of the few things that I have to take into account. All of these are the eventual impacts of climate change. we're going to have a denser population with I mentioned, a higher proportion of people that are more vulnerable to climate impacts or to warmer climates. There's going to be these events where it's going to rain a lot harder, so therefore we're going to have nuisance flooding. People won't want to be outside if the oval is not green, and therefore we need to cater how do we actually, instead of taking the water away in a concrete channel, how do we actually retain the water so that our environment's a bit greener. And loss, unfortunately, that's fine, but just the last one was about the impacts to property and life, so we need to care for that. As I mentioned, if we just keep going, I know I'm running a little bit late, but I'm very proud to say, the renewable electricity capital of Australia. We just like to say energy in general. But through that, we've secured not only low prices for the electricity, but also we're capturing all of the business development opportunities. That's just another little infographic about just how successful this program is. By 2020, we will have captured 400 million in local investment. So the challenge for us is to look at how do we actually benefit ourselves in adaptation. Now, a lot of people, and I like to talk about living infrastructure especially, because we're surrounded by so many trees that we take them for granted. And people in other jurisdictions talk about trees like, they're a nuisance. They drop leaves, they get into the sewers, they buckle the pavement, etc. But they don't see all of the benefits that trees bring, not just the shade, but the cooler environment. There's studies on mental health, that if you're surrounded by greenery, you actually feel calmer. Not only that, but mentioning, of course, the benefits to our natural environment, our furry and bushy-tailed friends. So when I'm going to my colleagues at Treasury, I need to highlight not just the cost, of course, of actually bringing the level of trees back to a decent level, I guess, but also the benefits throughout their life. Of course, if you have a nicely leafy suburb, your real estate prices, are going to be a lot higher. Keep going. Again, this is just a demonstration as we take for granted all of these lovely greenery that surrounds us. This is a chart that we prepared about the cost-benefit analysis of greenery, and it just goes on and on and on. But nobody seems to think about this. They only think about the initial cost of planting a tree. I think I'll leave it at that, and I guess open for questions.
Questions, anyone? Leo?
To put the ACT in context, Bhutan is carbon negative because they produce hydroelectricity and export it. India is running about the sustainable level of 2 tonnes per capita. China's about twice that. If we achieve our 2020 target, we'll be at about 8 tonnes per capita, which is 4 times the sustainable level. But that's only counting the things that are counted in the ACT greenhouse gas inventory, not things like food that are produced elsewhere, international air travel and things like that. So what would the total be per capita in?
I haven't done we don't have a calculation that brings into account the total. What we've done is we've just looked at the city, and I think it would be a little bit of a hard exercise, but we can actually do that. We are reviewing our current policy to reduce emissions, and we look at setting up a new sort of platform for what we're going to do into the future next year, because by the time we finish the election, we don't have any real time to work this year. The key aspect of that is that at the moment, most people have only focused on our target to 2020. But we also have the 2050 target, which is carbon neutrality. So your question is very appropriate. How do we actually can be totally, completely a carbon neutral society by 2050? We need to put interim targets, and associated to that, there will be carbon budgets that we need to reduce. And what we include in that is something that we need to discuss.
Marcus?
Yeah. I was interested in your comments, about greening the city and the benefits of greenery. We're going through a process at the moment of the redevelopment of Dixon, and I am sort of wondering, or I did have the thought, wouldn't it be great if all these new buildings in Dixon incorporated vertical gardens and actually made this this great statement when you come into Dixon about greenery in buildings.
Yep.
How much influence do you have on the work that's currently being done and the developments that are currently going
If
on?
I was elected, look, I've spoken a lot about living infrastructure, and I think that gives you the flavour of what a lot of the things that we're putting in our adaptation strategy is. We want to start to look really differently at how we develop the city, and that's from houses, buildings, suburbs, etc. To and you're not the first one to raise this issue, by the way. I've done a few of these council meetings or meeting with stakeholders, and everybody tells me, look, we seem to be developing and trampling over, the proportion of greenery and development. The proportion is not right. How can we actually bring it back more into balance?
Yeah.
So that's part of what we're going to look at. It is not a fast process, but it's the start of a process where we say, what is the appropriate amount of green cover for any type of development into the future?
First of all, Leon, I think the Commissioner for the Environment's tried to do some figures about the ACT and our actual impact, not just the ones that the easily attributable and consumption impact. But Mike, you probably may not be able to say much about this, but you were saying you were waiting on government decisions. To actually give us an idea of what the strategy is going to be, because obviously the strategy is really interesting and important. Have you any idea when that's going to happen? Is it, I suppose, is it something that will happen before the election, or is this?
I don't think it's I hope I'm not getting myself into trouble, but yes, we're looking at before the election. Okay. It's gone through the public consultation phase. We've incorporated comments, etc. Sent to the government, and we're just sort of like hoping that it is considered in a positive light.
John? Yes. Well, just listen to what you had to say about trees.
Yes.
I'd like to ask a question. Are you actually part of the government or paid by the government?
Yes, I'm a government employee.
Well, the government's a complete hypocrite. What they're doing is they're allowing the planning authorities, allowing and encouraging the smashing down of houses and established gardens, the removal of trees wholesale. It's happening broadly across O'Connor. It's aggravating us residents. Mike and I could go around and point to tree after tree after tree that's been smashed down. How many times am I on the phone to Tree Protection Unit? How many times do I have people who bloody in tears even over what's been happening next door to them? The belligerent, arrogant builders that are being facilitated and encouraged. They are hypocrites.
Yeah.
Simply as that. They are doing nothing. They're doing everything to destroy our trees. Even whoever the community housing, ACT housing, they destroy trees on their own property and don't replace them. There's so far to go. It's not funny. Now, I'd like to sit here and say to everyone and anyone, I've planted a dozen gum trees on my place and hundreds elsewhere.
Yep.
That's in O'Connor. Plus.
Okay. Look, I don't shy away from your comment. I have heard it several times, and our executive have heard it loud and clear many times, and it's true. I like to say that we're enjoying right now the benefits of the forethought of the planners from the 60s and 70s. If the development, the rate of development and nature of development that's happening now happened in the 60s and 70s, we wouldn't be enjoying as many trees. So what we're saying is this cannot continue because the environment is not going to let us to continue. We need to actually prepare to protect ourselves through our friends, which are the trees.
Are encouraging the destroying of trees and gardens wholesale.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And if you talk to the tree protection unit, they'll tell you they seem to be shut out of the process. They have to wait for people to complain by oftentimes it's too late.
I guess part of the problem, if I could, what I really meant to say was, but, no, but there isn't, I mean, when I watch what you're presenting here, and when I see on the street and all around me, two different planets,
Yeah.
okay? And I don't see this informing anything that's happening over here. In fact, you know, anything that's happening in Dixon or in O'Connor or in Turner, I find the policies, if anything, are going to go basically completely against anything that we're seeing here. And I would hate to see what, you know, our kids or any younger people are going to have to deal with, because in general what we're looking at is not an increase in green space, but if anything, it's being collapsed. So at a time when we need it more,
That's right.
we're actually finding that it's valued less.
Yes.
And that's exactly, I mean, I agree with you. And what we're dealing with is we have a policy framework now. When considered, this will be the new policy, right? And even then, moving, as you know, moving a big boat around is going to take time, and it's going to take persistence, and it's going to take a more, I guess, robust way of dealing across organisations and government. As I mentioned earlier on, if we keep doing the same thing that we've always done, we're not going to get there. Okay, but I do encourage you to. This is just the first of 4 slides, where we're actually starting to identify the positive benefit of trees and living infrastructure to society. And that's the case, that's the thin edge of the wedge that we go to government and say, this is why we need to ramp up protection of our green or living infrastructure.
I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but given this dichotomy, does your strategy that the government's currently considering actually identify what this is going to mean for all ACT departments?
For all ACT
ACT government departments? I mean, has it got an impact analysis in it that says this is what it's going to happen for APLAR and all the other people doing it?
Again, not going into the detail because of the process that it's in. And I refer back to what I've said several times. If we don't have a coordinated approach, and if we keep doing the same things, then we're not going to be able to make any effective.
The answer is yes.
Correct.
I realise you can't say it, I just thought you must think.
Sure.
There you
I guess I'm just leaving you, sort of like some indicators.
Look, I just think this is terrific, great. But then you relate it to the Coles Doma development that's going to happen in Dixon, and you look at the building that they're proposing, there is nothing about the planning for those buildings, as far as I can tell, and I'm only an amateur, that is doing anything to mitigate climate change, because there's nothing involved in those buildings in terms of temperature inside the buildings, outside the buildings, windows, doors. There's no shrubbery in the planning. They just seem to, it's back to the dark ages looking at that plan as far as I'm concerned. And so then to talk about trees and all of this, which is great, we've got to do it, why isn't there more emphasis on the planning of the buildings?
I take your comment on board, but I don't have an answer for you.
Can I follow up on that just very quickly? So then how is your role, how does that relate to the people who are responsible for actually approving these development applications for, whether it's as is or with conditions and that sort of thing? Because the impression I'm getting is all the things you're talking about here, which I think is great, doesn't go there. And there's a big disconnect. And I guess that's why since you're in environment and planning, and that's why I'm wondering, where do you fit in?
Right. So as a policy unit, what we're doing is we're looking at the impacts that are coming, and we're looking at options to try and reduce the level of impacts. And it's not enough for me to actually just go and do it in my own corner, in my own little silo. We have to engage with all the other directorates and alert them to the fact that this is happening. We need to change the way that we do business.
More of a comment than anything else. I used to work in energy efficiency, and trying to make buildings more efficient. And eventually we realised that it's all very well to encourage people to do it, but what we had to do was get the energy efficiency into the Building Code of Australia.
Yep.
And that sort of thing is why we now have minimum energy efficiency ratings for buildings. Another example is footpaths. There's about 30% of Canberra streets have no footpaths, but we had a major victory that hardly anybody noticed, not even me, about 3 or 4 years ago, when somebody tweaked the territory plan and said even the smallest streets have to have footpaths. So that means that we will never again build a street without a footpath. And it's getting these ideas into things like the territory plan is what's really going to make the difference.
That's right. Again, looking at all the different actions that we've identified is something called climate-wise buildings. So it's looking at energy efficiency, it's looking at design that actually reduces the amount of energy that you require to keep it comfortable. It's looking at how overall the building is what we call fit for purpose, not just now but into the future, with the least amount of energy to make it so. And so part of that is energy efficiency, better standards, better standards for design, better appliances, better streetscapes so that there's less incidence of the sun, etc., less heat island effect. So it all is trying to move towards making us more resilient and reducing the impacts.
Any other questions?
I got one follow-up.
Okay.
Just a question about the 100% renewable energy or renewable electricity.
Yep.
I think that's great. I remember when it was first announced a number of years ago, I thought that's not going to happen, but it looks like it is happening, which is great. One question about that, I mean, I haven't looked at this in any detail, but I imagine the way that works is that we generate, through renewable projects, the amount of electricity we consume, but the generation doesn't necessarily coincide with consumption, and so we will have to pull energy or electricity from other sources at some time. I imagine that because the sun doesn't shine 24 hours a day and the wind doesn't blow always, and so like Sydney could do the same things. They're obviously a much bigger market, and you need renewables can't. But you can comment on that. Maybe that's not the case. The other sort of related question I have on that is are we moving towards a policy on gas? Because I know a lot of houses in the ACT heat their homes with gas. It's a major energy use in the ACT, and I'm wondering if there is some sort of proposal to either sort of move away from gas or incorporate that into some sort of strategy.
Okay, I'll start with the first. Right?
Yeah.
You're right. We don't have the ability to create all of the renewable electricity that we consume within the ACT. We have great areas for solar farms, for example, and as you might have heard, there's going to be 3. There's one already, there's 2 others being built, etc. We don't have fantastic wind resources here because where there's really great wind is in the national parks. So we're not proposing to build any wind farms there. So we look at the national electricity network, and we've identified projects where, if they meet a number of criteria, we basically co-invest. We set up a purchase price for that electricity. So that electricity goes into the network. The electrons don't know where they come from. What we receive are the certificates, in essence. So we can put our hands on our heart and say, yep, the consumption of electricity that ACT has is being produced by renewable sources. And it is to our advantage because there will be days where the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine here in Canberra. We've seen a few days of like those recently. But by having these investments strategically across the whole network, we will always be assured that there is going to be, a source that's providing that amount or a percentage of electricity. And yes, we are piggybacking on the fact that in other parts there's coal-fueled electricity, and so we will be tapping into that until we have, we manage to get to a quantity of generation that equates to 100% consumption. So that's the first part. by 2020, the profile of emissions that we have in the ACT is going to be completely different. Right now we're looking at electricity because it's the largest emitting sector. By 2020 it'll be the transport sector. By 2020, 54% of our emissions are going to come from the cars and the buses and etc. that we use. So we need to start to think now, how are we going to tackle that? If we wait until 2020 and we pat ourselves on the back and say, great, we did it, we'll miss the bus. We'll miss the ability to meet our final objective, which is by 2050 carbon neutrality. So we need to start to think now what new mitigation work we need to do for the transport sector and for natural gas and for energy efficient buildings. Those are the big emitters from here on. To a degree, renewable electricity, I don't want to in any way disparage my colleagues that are working on that. It's a lot of work that they've done, but it's still the low-hanging fruit. It's the easy things to do. It's the next sectors that are going to start to get harder and harder for us to achieve emissions reductions. Okay.
I'll just have one final question. I think it might have even been kind of what I said earlier. I just want to, so the next steps here, I know they had a sort of a public consultation, and then you're putting something together, and then that happens.
That's being considered by government as soon as hopefully the government will agree with the proposals, and then it will be released as a policy. And our job then is to look at all of the actions that we've put in within that strategy, have an implementation plan. We already are working on an implementation plan in the hope that everything's going to get the green thumbs, and then start to actually push to achieve all of those things. And the time frames are quite short. This strategy is, we have to have all of them completed by 2020. So it's not a lot of time. And at that point, we'll revise and start to look at, okay, what are the next things that we need to start to work on? I hope that kind of answered the question.
Okay, well, I think that will conclude Antonio's presentation. So let's